How's it going, guys? John the Basic Expert here, and this is a video that I've been meaning to do for a while, and I just haven't gotten around to it. I've just been so busy with my own Kickstarters and things like that, and this thing's been sitting on my shelf for, I don't know, since it was delivered and the last Kickstarter, and this is the Lost Dungeon of Tonisborg by Greg Svensson. You can see on the side here. I generally like this product. It's definitely like an interesting relic of the past in a lot of ways, you know, and I'm always, as you guys know, I'm always interested in those sorts of things. Even if I disagree with maybe some of the conclusions that are sort of provided as commentary in these sorts of things. You know, I can respect people's different opinions, different views on what the hobby is and whatnot, and I'm more than happy to have obviously discussion about these sorts of things as well. First of all, looking at the exterior of the book, it's relatively well made. I like the cover. Apparently it's handmade. You know, it has the bookmark here as well on the bottom, which is really neat. I think the one thing that I am slightly not super thrilled about, if I can pick one thing about the make of it, is I wish it was Smithsonian. Let me see if I can get it to focus there. As you can see, it's not a Smithsonian book. I wish it was. It's not. But, you know, other than that, I think it will still hold up relatively well. And even in this version here, I just wish it was Smithsonian, you know. Smithsonian is just super nice. On the inside, you know, has the purple backing paper. There's just the art on here and everything. A while back, this section here was, I guess, extremely... caused some uproar in the old school gaming sphere, I guess, because it's the section right at the start of the book called Respecting One's Boundaries and Expectations. And I think if this thing had been titled something different, it might have gone over a little easier, maybe. It's hard to say, right? I think that it kind of walks the line as far as these sort of content warnings, kind of like what Wizards of the Coast has done with old school modules and whatnot. It's not quite as bad as that at all. It doesn't seem to demonize Greg Svensson or any of the Blackmore group or anyone like this that runs old school games, but it does stipulate that these games are from a different time and that they may not align with our modern sensibilities. I guess my gripe with this would be that our modern sensibilities are stupid, and if you're offended by things that have to do with mythology and folklore and things of the past, you're an idiot, and I personally don't care if you're offended or not. And that's just me being, like, brutally honest. I just think you have a bad ideology. You have, like, a stupid view of things. You have, like, this very dumb, anti-traditionalist view of things. And so I sort of feel like catering to those kinds of people, even in this way here, where it is still fairly reasonable, it does bother me a little bit. I have to say, it does bother me just a bit. But it's not anywhere like, you know, it's not like in those people that do like not that Chaosium has done this, but other companies I know have sort of made money off of H.P. Lovecraft's work, and you know, you have Cthulhu and it's the whole mythos, and while they're talking about how they're making money essentially off of Lovecraft's legacy and ideas and everything, they're also talking mad trash about the man as well for holding views that were honestly pretty common at the time in the 1920s, early 1900s. So it's not anything like that. It's not calling Dave Arneson or Greg Svensson or any of these people bad names or anything like that. But I don't know. I just feel like this sort of thing legitimizes the stupid thoughts that we have in the hobby these days. Where, like, the old school stuff, that even if you find it offensive, it's not meant to be offensive. It's not meant to be hurtful. And if you're hurt by that, then I don't know. Mythology and adventure gaming and things like that are probably not for you. Fantasy gaming, which draws from mythology and folklore, is probably not for you. So, getting beyond that, you know, that's just my 2 cents on that whole thing there. It was a big, like, thing not that long ago. All right, well, you can see we have some table of contents here. You have a lot of stuff on how to use this book, etc., etc. It there is a full game system in this, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But there's also some history about why it's called the Lost Dungeon of Tonisborg, all of these sorts of things. You got lots of different ideas in here about how to run old school games, at least as far as the author providing commentary is concerned. Griff. Griff, as far as Griff is concerned, and he's been around for a while, but this is one of those things where you can take it or leave it. You can skip right to the Dungeon of Tonisborg and look at all those parts as well. And then you can see here there's rules to play with. You have rules for essentially how to run like a old school 0E game, and I'll talk about my views on that as well when we get to that point. But we got some history of the game. If you've watched the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary, it's kind of goes along with that. Greg Svensson is in that documentary. Essentially, what happened was this was a dungeon that was thought lost. At least the original versions were lost, but then scans were found, and we have some of the original scans here of what the dungeon looked like here. And what was in those rooms, very old school, kind of fun housey sort of dungeon in a lot of ways. And this is like obviously pre-D&D. This is pre 3LBBs. They're running. What I can tell from watching the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary, I see 2D6 on the table. I assume they're running, and the 3LBBs have hinted at this and talk about this, and I think Gary is Dave had admitted this as well, or claimed this as well. It was a modified version of the chainmail rules in a lot of ways. So this is pre the D20. This is pre kind of what we have in our minds as a typical conception of what the game originally was. So I think this is neat. I like this stuff here of these old dungeon maps, and I think that's it's just a neat bit of history as it goes through the levels of the dungeon, and then some pages here about like what was in there. I have to say too, the interior, like while I wished it was Smith's own book, the page quality is nice, and the quality of the color prints here of these scans and everything is quite good. Everything's very legible, and all that kind of stuff. So, got an example of play here, very similar to what's like in the 3LBBs, and kind of like how to use this book, how to run an old school game, what's going to be, at least as far again as the author is concerned, as far as their opinion on that. There's some good advice in here. There's some advice that I disagree with as well. That I don't feel. I feel leans a little bit too much into Rule 0, but you guys know me and you know my opinion on that kind of stuff. And those are things that I can take or leave, because if I run this, I'm going to use chainmail. I'm going to use aspects of chainmail to fill in the gaps of 0E rather than filling it in with my own sort of assumptions, or what a friend of mine, Clerics War Ringmails, has posited as Moldvayan revisionism, where we sort of look at BX and Moldvay and we kind of read that back into 0E and assume that's how the game was played, or that's what those original rules intended. Well, that's what the rules became eventually, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what was originally intended within the rule books themselves in the 70s, right? So, we got lots of different things here. GM advice, how to keep your players excited, interested. I read all this when I first got it, and I found some good stuff in here. There's some quotes from various players, Dave Arneson, or people that played in his group as well, which is cool. Let's get to the actual dungeon here soon. Some of the art is pretty good too. I like this guy here. It's pretty good art on the inside, and you'll notice too the layout is very similar in in look to like 1E Dungeons and Dragons. which I like that sort of Futura font. It's very clean. I like the old school look. There's a lot of text crammed into a page when you have this kind of book, but ultimately I think it has a nice old school feel to it as far as like look is concerned. So yeah, you got lots of different adventures here. It talks about kind of like this. So you have the story begins, and so what it is like Tonisborg. There's like a dungeon near the castle of Tonisborg, and there's this like order of let me see here. The Dracanae, the Order of the Dracanae, which is an highly order created by the Great Sveni, with one directive to control the entrance and egress of the dungeons of Tonisborg. They are a hereditary order, their mission passed on to each successive generation. Whether born to the order or adopted in, each member has a red dragon painted at the top of their shield in chief. Above their personal coat of arms, they dress in white capes with white cowls. A red full-length tunic might also be worn. So I ran this for a group on my birthday last year. So this is how long I've been sitting on this book. I ran them through it last year. We got partway through the dungeon. We did like a whole day thing. It was a bit of fun. Almost had some deaths, cleared a few rooms, and I've also solo gamed in this a bit. And it is a pretty deadly dungeon. You're gonna need hirelings. Your players. That's one thing with a lot of these old school dungeons and games is that you can't go into these with the assumption that like you can do the 5e style, like it's just a party of overpowered heroes. Even if you're using chainmail, even if you're filling in the gaps with chainmail, or you're using my white box rules or something like that, you're still gonna run into some problems here. Like my players ran into, I think it was in room 15 here. I think it was 15. Yes, because there was like 4th level fighters in there, and those guys, they didn't realize they were level 4 fighters when they ran into them in this room here, in room 15. And you can see the dungeons are drawn very well. I like the way these dungeon maps are drawn. Very good for Theater of the Mind, not so good if you're trying to import this into a VTT, obviously, but good for Theater of the Mind. And you notice like it's not like most dungeon maps where the squares are like on a grid. Like the squares go with the shape of the hallway here, which can throw, I think, party groups off. But all in all, I run my games through the mind, and when I ran my friends through this, well, we used Theater of the Mind as well. But anyways, they got into room 15 here, and there's 3 fighters here of the Order of Dracanae, and they're like in a torture room, essentially, pretty much. And they try to fight him. I think they were able to actually kill one of these guys. They got surprise on them, I think, and they were just able to dominate the guy. Because I'll also say when I ran it the first time, so this is how I ran this thing too, and it's worked out fairly well either way I've done it. When I ran it for my friends on my birthday, I did the 3 little brown books with plus Greyhawk. I was using this guy with the 3 LBBs in running this. I have since used it with white box, with my white box rules and chainmail solo gaming, and it's very similar in feel. There's not much of a difference. So whichever way you end up trying to go with this, it's probably going to work. But you have different levels. I think it's a 9-level dungeon if I remember correctly. And obviously the deeper you go, the more chaotic and horrible it gets. And there's a 9th level. Oh, there's a 10th level. And you can see like the way these maps look, the way these dungeons look, it can get pretty intense here. You could very easily get lost. And one thing I learned looking at this in comparison for dungeon design, and you kind of see this with how the 1E dungeon generator works in Appendix A, is that this sort of has like you look how chaotic and all these 45-degree angles and right angles and these veering off passages and things like that. Like this is a place designed to get lost in, and this is the importance of a mapper, right? In a play group, and so you kind of see these sort of dungeon maps, and to me, it's kind of inspiring to see them and to think, uh, how let's look at the 5e appendix A, for example. That five my big gripe with the 5e appendix A book or appendix A dungeon generator, while I think it's awesome that the 5e books had a generator in it, super awesome, super helpful. I think that it lacking 45-degree turns and things like that, and angles and these offshoot passages made it so that dungeons were very predictable and very easy to navigate and hard to get lost in a lot of respects. And with this, like I could imagine if you're especially if you're playing Theater of the Mind and they're not taking careful notes, someone could easily get lost in level 10 here. So I think that is pretty cool. So you get to the bottom. There's lots of crazy stuff here at the bottom of the dungeon, of course, and then we get rules to play with, and this is where I don't really get much. I wouldn't get much use out of this here, for me personally. Now, I think the rules within this are fine. They're very like standard fare as far as interpreting the sort of nostalgic view leaning into GM fiat view. And that's where I just diverge from a lot of these older guys where, I want to implement chainmail. I want to have a little bit more mechanical undergirding of my games than just relying on me as a GM to just make a ruling. I'm not opposed to doing that, of course, but I don't want me to be the sole thing upon which the rules are resting on. I like the rules to stand on their own a little bit, hence why I've made Whitebox and incorporated a lot of that of chainmail into 0E using the D20 alternative combat system. So this does use descending AC, which is cool. You got like halflings, you got dwarves. It has a lot of things like baked into it. Like you could view this as like a very simple. Dumbing down would not be the correct word. Like a like if you didn't want to use chainmail and you wanted to make this game work, how would you make it work? And you'd have to go a different route. It's gonna require some calls and some homebrewing and some ideas that are not necessarily inherent to the game. If you go the route that I go, which is use chainmail, but you do have a complete rules in here, spells and everything. That you can use, and there's even treasure in here as well. There are monsters, I believe. Creatures in Fantastic Mundane. So you do have like a slight monster manual in here of creatures, very basic, per like a lot of 0E stuff. But for me personally, I just I don't have personally like a need for that because I rather enjoy when you have an index. I rather enjoy running Whitebox, my version of using chainmail into it, and I like that, and so I don't like leaning into this. And within Whitebox, it still requires some loosey goosey GM calling, referee fiat. You got to make a ruling because there's not a rule for everything. Even when you incorporate in chainmail, there's still holes. There's just less holes. There's less gaps, but to me, it's just, I don't know, it's more fun. It feels more, I don't want to call anyone who doesn't play the way I play inauthentic, but to me, it feels more authentic because what I'm trying to do with that is, run the game based on just what would be available to me at the time, which is maybe one strategic review number 1, volume 1, issue 1, and the 3 LBBs and chainmail. And that's all I have to try and make this game work. And there's some fun in trying to retroactively reconstruct a game out of that. But all in all, I guess the pros, it's a neat piece of gaming history in this book. I think if you got in on the Kickstarter like I did, I know like previous versions of this book have become collector's items. They've gone on eBay for very expensive for the offset prints of these. There's a paperback version available now, and so those are available at the Fellowship of the Thing website. I wish that it was, again, I wish it was Smith's-Own. I appreciate the bookmark, but I wish it was a Smith's-Own book. I just like, in a lot of these offset prints, to make it Smith's-Own if it can be. The advice in it is, there's a lot of good advice for running old school games, and if you're like me, but you want a different aesthetic, you want a different feel, some of the advice is going to be very helpful to you. Because you don't want to lean in, like me, you don't want to lean in so far into the GM fiat thing. And, that's fine. Even if you're like me, there's still going to be things you draw from in this that are, useful and beneficial. So this is The Lost Dungeon of Tonisborg by Greg Svensson. There's his name there. Lovely book. I don't agree with all the advice in it, but I think it's an interesting piece of gaming history. Again, I love these notes and scans in here of all this old stuff. This stuff right here is really neat to read. Some pre-D&D history in this. So I think this is pretty awesome. And again, the interior printing looks really good. The scans turned out really great. Totally legible. And you can make out exactly still what is being said on the page there. So all in all, I'm still very, despite like it not being Smith's-Own and not liking all the advice in it, and personally not really getting much use out of the rule system within it, I still think it's pretty neat. For me as a nerd that likes this gaming archaeology, as I call it, these sorts of things always interest me. I love looking at these sorts of things. So yeah, this is a Lost Dungeon of Tonisborg. If you guys like this kind of stuff, you like these book flip throughs and stuff, like, subscribe, share the video, sound off in the comment below what you think. Did you back this Kickstarter a while back? What do you think about it? Have you ran it? The few times that I've used this, it's been fun. It's definitely a very old school dungeon with, as far as like, you got like dragons and closets and things like that, like as people like to put it, broom closets full of wyverns and things like that. I've talked about this before, but you can make these ideas work. You can make these ideas make sense. And I plan on making a video talking about that in the future. But yeah, Lost Dungeon of Tonisborg. Like, subscribe, share the video if you like this kind of content. You can support the channel right here on YouTube or on Subscribestar or on my Gilded server. Check out my Substack, has the links to all those places on it. That'll be in the pinned comment below. And thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.